Greetings. I hope everyone had a nice lunch break. I'm Taylor with Software Cooperative Vulk Coop. I'm also a co-chair of the CNF working group and a cloud native telecom liaison. I have a short overview of CNCF's CNF certification program. For those that don't know, CNCF, the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, is an open source vendor neutral hub for cloud native computing. They host projects like Kubernetes and Prometheus, as well as service proxies like Contour, the eBPF networking project Cilium, and many others. CNCF has a mission of making cloud native computing ubiquitous. This entails helping people to understand what cloud native means, promoting cloud native principles, best practices, and overall fostering ecosystem and community that allow multiple technologies and organizations to coexist. So we know that CSPs, communication service providers, are migrating to cloud native. And CNCF released a micro-survey earlier this year to better understand why. Some of the feedback included a desire to continue with disaggregation or decoupling of hardware and software, providing vendor-neutral interoperability throughout the stack, including between CNFs in the workloads that they're running, and increasing flexibility and options for all the network services from deployment through the operations of those services. In response to feedback from telecom organizations, in its efforts to build a cloud-native telecom community, CNCF launched the CNF certification beta earlier this year at KubeCon Valencia. This program is guided by the input from the providers, the CSPs, from the cloud-native community, projects, and individuals that are part of that community, and telecom organizations who are seeking to share their experiences, use cases, technology, in growing that community. The program itself is designed to connect the providers with CNF creators who have demonstrated adoption of cloud native best practices in their products. So they're trying to follow the practices as they're running on Kubernetes and working with others. A CNF, for those that aren't familiar with the term, stands for a cloud native network function. So this consists of one or more microservices following cloud native principles like immutability, declarative APIs, repeatable deployment process. The certification program and the suite of tests that it uses give insight into cloud native properties like installability, interoperability, resilience, workload self-healing. CNCF is focused on community-driven projects and initiatives, and the certification community is trying to follow the same sort of ideals. CNF vendors, service providers, cloud native members have contributed to the principles, the networking and cloud native principles that influence the program. Those principles are being incorporated into the material we're seeing in the telecom community now, blogs, additional white papers. CNCF project maintainers contributed directly to the certification. So we have tests from projects like Kyverno and Cubescape and Falco in the security area, Litmus Chaos and Resiliency, that's a workload self-healing type of things, and input from service providers like Vodafone, Dish Networks, Deutsche Telekom. They've shared their support as well in press releases and social media. So thanks to everyone who has helped, and in advance to anyone that contributes. For those that would like to earn a certified CNF status for a product offering, you can get started on the landing page. This is at CNCF.io/CNF. There's some eligibility requirements that are pretty straightforward, participation form that specifies the product offering, and then you run the suite of tests. So the CNF test suite has an extensive set, has a subset that's focused on the certification program itself, and then you'll submit those results. This is on, like most projects within CNCF, on GitHub. Once those have been reviewed and you're passing the essential set of tests, then you get to be listed on CNCF's landing page in the landscape and start using that certified CNF mark, communicating to service providers. As of today, again, this is a beta, as of today, we have 6 certified products that have gone through in the last several months. We have more that are on the way. And if you get started soon, then you'll be listed on places like KubeCon, Cloud Native Telco Day, and any other events that we're going to be attending. CNCF's webinars, those landing page like I mentioned, as well as press release and social media. So here's some of the folks that were on there. Deutsche Telekom, this is a snapshot, so we had some other folks. So the CNF certification is per product, so if there's multiple products, as you saw, we have multiple listed. The price is tied in with CNCF membership. If you're a nonprofit, it's free. All right, so this certification program is community driven, like most projects and initiatives that you'll see if you're familiar with CNCF. They're built from the ground up. They're part of the whole ecosystem, and the best practices are sourced from the different parties that are experts in the field for security and resiliency, like the Chaos Mesh, Litmus Chaos, and other folks there. Open source, so the test suite is open source. All the tests are viewable. You can download and run it as a tool. Open standards, so those are the practices and stuff just built within the community. CNCF avoids picking one solution for one use case. Instead, it encourages competing solutions and different options so that you can find what fits. Similarly, the certification itself, the policies, the test are sourced from those different projects. So we actually have tests. Some of them are from one security project or another one within the community. Same thing for resilience. And telecom organizations that are adopting these can choose to take on these best practices in addition to following other standards or requirements that they may have for their business needs. And that's encouraged so that you try to make it possible to utilize multiple things. We have a lot of places to work together, including all of the parts of the program and other telecom-specific initiatives are all on GitHub, and that may be posting ideas. We have discussion boards, bugs and issues for folks that are actually trying to work through those. We have 2 weekly meetings. One is focused on use cases, user stories, documenting best practices and the discussions. That's the CNF working group on Mondays. And on Tuesdays, we have a open office hours. That's for the test suite. That's the tool chain for testing the certification and talking about anything that folks are going through, whether they're just getting started or maybe we've had some contribution discussions on that too, where people have put pull requests and worked through those ideas, and some of those are now part of the test suite. CNCF runs a public Slack, so we're available on there to chat as well. The certification team is holding a hands-on certification workshop on Friday during the LFN Developer and Testing Forum. If you have a networking application and access to a Kubernetes cluster, or maybe have it running inside of Kind or something on your laptop, you can come and join us. If you want to try it out ahead of time, that's fine. If you want to just get started right during the workshop and try out the test suite and the certification, we're there to do that. We'll also be at KubeCon EU and Cloud Native Telco Day, probably other events as well, but these are some coming out. If you have some ideas for talks, please submit them by Friday for KubeCon. Right now we don't have CFPs open for Telco Day, but you can start thinking of ideas. We'll open that as soon as possible. This is a co-located event. And we had a good participation last time. We're trying to expand it a little bit. If anyone's interested in sponsorship, make sure we do live streaming. I think I jumped ahead. So you can get started again here at CNCFIO/CNF. This is for the certification program. This is the landing page on there. You'll get links to the steps to go through it. Those are the technical requirements, everything else, as well as sending you to the test suite itself, which has a short number of steps, which you can see if you join us on Friday. And we're also available, the certification team, to do one-on-one. We can do demos. If you've decided to start using it as a tool, which we've seen some folks actually put it in their CI pipeline and developer workflow, then happy to chat with you there, talk about use cases, also talking with service providers about how to use it with their operations team for onboarding CNFs. And we are at the CNCF booth all week, as well as at LFN Developer Forum. So happy to talk with you about any challenges, your use cases, your products that are running in Kubernetes, and how we can help. That's it. Thank you. Sure, I'm not sure if we have Q&A, but I'm happy to answer. Go ahead. How much time do we have?
3 minutes.
Okay, go ahead.
3 minutes, okay. Just a very quick question, right? And because obviously we have the CNCF test suite, and then we have some sort of requirement in the telecom user group. I just want to understand how you are factoring in the telecom specific workload characteristics, because, it's not about building one set of test cases that you run. You need to really tailor it, like the characteristics of UPF are quite different than some of the workloads that you just showed, right? I specifically take a note of what workloads got certified, and they are cloud native and more like an IT sort of applications used by the telco, firewalls and DNS and NATs, and so just need to see that aspect, how you are considering and how we can make it happen.
So the question is how are we considering telco specific use cases and the workloads? I think this is probably a good place to start. So if a lot of the use cases, you mentioned DNS and firewalls, so if you're looking at something coming from a edge network all the way through to a core, at some point you're going to hit firewalls, you're going to hit your broadband gateways and other pieces. There's a lot of those components which would fit in with IT type of workloads.
Yeah.
So I would say one of the things is important is if you can help part of your workload, then make sure that you help part of that workload. And if it's easier to fix those or upgrade those or adjust them to where they're going to take advantage of best practices that make them easier to manage for the operation teams, then that's a good place to start. When you get into specific applications that may be tying into like the radio access network, or maybe they have specific requirements on performance, then you may have some additional pieces. And then of course you have requirements maybe for specific protocols that you have to do integrations and that sort of thing. So what we're trying to do right now with the CNF certification is focus on the best practices for the application working with Kubernetes. So this is a workload on Kubernetes, and starting with the parts that everyone can agree on. Whenever you start moving on to specific pieces that you need to add additional functionality or additional testing, that's fine, you can add those. So we're talking a baseline, this would be the upstream, and then you build from there. We don't focus on specific a telco test and protocols, but we do try to take feedback. So we've been on some Etsy plug test conferences, 2 in the last year and a half. We've been asked to come and present, and there's been mutual analysis back both directions over and this goes beyond just the certification, the entire set of tests in the test suite and best practices that have been communicated and shared in the Kubernetes and CNCF community on what would be useful for 3GPP and 5G moving forward. Some of them have actually been adopted a year and a half ago to go into future versions of what Etsy was doing. So I think that there's complementary work between them.
Yeah, but sorry for repeating this, because you see this is a very good framework. I should say it's called framework, but when you select a workload, the definition of security for a SEC gateway is very different if you consider a 5G core function like a AMF or SMF that just handling the session. So I don't know how running one sort of tests will satisfy both, because that's a challenge, right? So
I don't think that it's going to satisfy both. I think when you're looking at an operator that's saying here is what we're selecting, they're going to have a lot of different requirements. And so what we're trying to do is build a baseline that you can, if you're on Kubernetes, a Kubernetes workload, then are you following those best practices on Kubernetes? Now what's the next thing that you're needing? And if you look at some projects that they may be building a 5G core, they may be following all the standards that are common, or you may look at something else and you're starting to see different protocols being used between some of the components that aren't following the standards. And I think that's going to be dependent on the operator and the integrator's choice and all the discussions there. And we're trying to focus on that base. If you go and look at, Elephant Aniket project, they're looking at from the platform side on what are the pieces for Kubernetes as a platform, and you can add on from there. They're looking at the application testing side, starting with they've run some of the stuff that we've been doing and pulled in a lot of the stuff in the reference architecture for how you would want an application to behave. But then they extend beyond for some specific requirements that they've seen without going into 5G specific, but how can I actually have a production Kubernetes? So that's the first level, and I think at the next level is going to actually be if a vendor's saying, we have a product and we're meeting specific needs. Any other questions? Did you have a specific screen you wanted to see? All right. All right. So again, we're going to have a hands-on workshop Friday for the certification. Thank you.